One of the most important foundational skills that we can have in geometry is being able to solve one, two, and multi-step equations. So our goal is to successfully solve each type of equation because we will need these skills all year. In fact, we have a standard that will be used to assess these skills. So while we are talking about our geometry topics, one of those standards that we will see in Units 2 and 3 will be to create equations and use them to solve problems. Well, in order to be able to solve them correctly, we must know how to solve one, two, and multi-step equations. So remember, our goal when we are solving equations is to get the variable, which is the letter, by itself. We use inverse operations, so addition and subtraction undo each other, and multiplication and division undo each other. And remember, what you do to one side of the equation, you absolutely must do to the other side of the equation. So we're going to start with one-step equations. When we are solving equations, I usually recommend that students draw a line through all the problems to help them keep track of the left and the right side. So if you do something to the left side of the line, you need to make sure you do it to that right side as well. So x minus 3 equals 6. Because I have this negative here, the inverse of subtraction is addition, so I'm going to add 3. The reason I do this is because that gets rid of this number and that becomes 0. That's why we are allowed to cross it off. When we take the sum of these numbers, if we do not get 0, we have done something wrong and we cannot cross them out. So then all I do is simplify the other side now that x is by itself. So my answer is x equals 9. I can do the same thing with the next problem, except because I have addition, I'm then going to be subtracting on both sides. So that will leave me with p equals -2 plus -3, which is -5. The next problem, what I see here, this is a form of multiplication. The numbers do not have a sign in between them, and so that means I'm going to need to use division because that is the opposite of multiplication in order to get the variable by itself. When I'm doing division or multiplication, my goal is to get a coefficient of 1. So when I divide by 3, 3 divided by 3 is 1. So I can in fact say that 3 equals x, and that is my answer. Finally, with the last one, this is a fraction, and this is a way to show division. So in order to get the variable by itself, I'm going to multiply by the denominator, which is the bottom of that fraction. And that will then give me 1. So I'm left with n equals -221. Now we are going to work on two-step equations. Two-step equations are very similar. I still want to draw that line through all of my problems so that I can make sure that whatever I do to the left of the line, I also end up doing to the right. But now, instead of just doing one thing to get the variable by itself, we'll have to do two things to get the variable by itself. So my goal is to get this m by itself. In order to do that, I'm going to begin by subtracting 1. You'll almost always, you'll start with either your addition or subtraction. So I get -24 equals 2m. And if you have done your two-step equation correctly, you should then find that you're left with a one-step equation. So I will divide by 2, and I get m equals -12. I'm going to do the same thing to start off on the second one. My goal is to get this x by itself. So I will subtract 4. The reason I know that I need to subtract 4 here is because there's no sign in front of it. If it had a negative, then I would add it. But if I don't see a sign, that means that I'm dealing with a positive number. So I'm left with x over 2 equals 2. I can then go ahead and multiply by 2 on both sides. So my answer, x equals 4. With the next problem, in order to get the variable by itself, I first have to do distributive property, and there's really a -1 here. So I'm going to multiply the -1 to the first thing inside the parentheses and to the second thing. So -5 equals -x minus 6. I will go ahead then and add 6 to both sides so that I can get the x by itself. But notice here, x is not by itself. It has a coefficient of -1. So in order to get rid of that negative, I'm going to divide -1 on both sides. So my answer here is -1 equals positive x. We are not allowed to leave our answers with a negative in front of the x. We have to have a positive x. Then I can go ahead and multiply by 16 on this next problem. And I get r minus 10 equals -16. I'll add 10 to both sides. And I get r equals -6. The last kind of problem that we will see are multi-step equations. Multi-step equations could take 3, 4, 5, or more steps, but just like we saw with two-step equations, once we do a step, we get it down to a one-step. So eventually with these problems, you'll get it down to a two-step, and then down to a one-step, and then you'll be solving from there. Our goal when we are solving multi-step equations is that we must start by combining like terms. So I'm still going to follow the same procedure of drawing my line down the equal sign, but then I'm going to look for a like term. So like terms have the same variable and the same exponents. So -3k. There is nothing on the left side of the equation that also has a k. So that means that that one is all by itself. But I do have a -4, and that is a like term with the -8. So then I can go ahead and combine these two. So I get -3k minus 12. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I have k. There's no other k, so I don't have anything to combine it with. But I do have a +7, a -4, and a +9. The sum of those like terms is going to give me 12. So I'm left with -3k minus 12 equals k plus 12. So my goal now is to move my variables to the other side. So it doesn't matter which one you start with. So that's going to give me, I really have a 1 in front of that k, so it's going to be -4k minus 12 equals +12. And then from here, I can go ahead and add 12 on both sides. So I'm going to be left with -4k equals 24. Notice that we've gotten it down to our one-step equation. And when I divide by -4, k equals -6. In order to solve the next problem, I'm going to begin by distributing. So I will do -7 times 1 and -7 times -7 r. So that will give me -7 plus 49r. And then I am once again looking for my like terms. So that's my -6r and my +49r. So 165 equals 43r minus 7. At this point, I can go ahead and move my 7 over. So that's going to give me 172 equals 43r. Then I divide both sides by 43, and my final answer is 4 equals r. These look very similar to the types of problems that you are going to see in geometry this year. So we still start off solving them the same way. If we have more than two terms on one side of the equation, I need to begin by combining like terms. So we can combine the 115 and the -5. That's going to then give me 110 plus 14x equals 180. I will subtract 110 on both sides. This is my two-step equation. So I get 14x equals 70. When I divide both sides by 14, I get that x equals 5. Same kinds of steps happen over here. Notice that I have an x on each side of the equation, so the first thing I need to do is move my x's so that I only have one x in my equation. Then I can go ahead and divide. Remember, there's really a -1 out in front of that x, so I'll divide both sides by -1. So my answer is 10 equals x. Sometimes we'll see these exact kinds of problems. They'll just be a little bit longer. Notice this problem has an x on both sides of the equation, so I'm going to pick one of them and move it so that once again I only have one x. And then I'm going to go ahead and move my numbers so that I only have one number. And then my answer, 1x equals 6, is the same thing as saying x equals 6. And I'll do the same thing down here. But before we can begin, we have to combine like terms. We can combine the 8 and the 18. And then we will combine the 4 and the -6. So that will then give me 26x minus 2 equals 180. I'll add 2 to both sides. This is my typical two-step equation. So 26x equals 182. When I divide both of those numbers, I get that x is equal to 7. And that is my final answer.